new American president, a new chapter for U.S.-Israeli relations. But how could the White House frontrunners shape Washington's relations with Israel? Also on today's program, the battle for Karabakh. A ceasefire may be in place, but what made the Cold War's frozen conflict heat up? And in Picture This, how to halt the ivory trade. We look at Kenya's latest drive to stop poaching. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. The United States will inaugurate a new president in January next year. That means Barack Obama has less than a year left to put the finishing touches to his legacy. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize shortly after his election in 2009 in what the committee hoped would give momentum to his foreign policy hopes and dreams. But it's taken until his final term to make two of his biggest statements: the restoring of relations with Cuba and the nuclear deal with Iran. One thing the president is yet to truly leave his mark on is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Might we see a change as the end of his term nears? And more importantly, what will his successor do? 3 of the 4 frontrunners across both parties have declared strong support for Israel, while only one, Bernie Sanders, has taken a more cautious approach. Today's newsmaker is America's next president, as we ask what the future holds for U.S. relations with Israel.
All of you understand what's at stake in this election.
My number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran.
Advance the cause of peace as a partner and as a friend to Israel.
Imagine a president who stands unapologetically with the nation of Israel.
The Israel lobby. It's one of the biggest in the US, and with its influence and big donation dollars, it's heavily courted by US presidential hopefuls. But under President Barack Obama, the US's long-standing relations with Israel have become strained. In trying to take a step back from the Middle East, he created rifts with his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, and relations reached an all-time low during negotiations of the Iran nuclear deal. But with a guaranteed change in the White House this election, people are watching to see whether presidential candidates are looking to restore relations with Israel or turn away from it. Democratic frontrunner and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, she has broad support in the pro-Israel community. She is for the two-state solution and has made it clear that Israel's security is non-negotiable.
There's a big difference between talking about holding Tehran accountable and actually doing it.
Clinton has been scathing of Republican rival Donald Trump for his stance on Israel.
We need steady hands, not a president who says he's neutral on Monday, pro-Israel on Tuesday, and who knows what on Wednesday.
But it seems Trump now has a very clear Israel policy.
When I'm president, believe me, I will veto any attempt by the UN to impose its will on the Jewish state.
Trump says he would stop the Iran nuclear deal by whatever means necessary. He's voiced strong support for Israel as a military and economic partner, but he's not been clear on his views on a Palestinian state. And there's scepticism about whether he will stand by these policies or is paying lip service to lobbyists. The future of Israeli-US relations could also be put in the hands of these 3 hopefuls. Bernie Sanders, the only Jewish candidate. He supports Israeli security as well as a two-state solution.
We have also got to be a friend not only to Israel, but to the Palestinian people.
But he has been critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and opposes the Israeli blockade of Gaza. He supports the Iran nuclear deal, but sees military intervention as a last resort. John Kasich, the third-placed Republican hopeful. He says he is a strong emotional supporter of Israel. He has defended the building of Israeli settlements and opposed the Iran deal. Ted Cruz, Donald Trump's main rival. He says he is committed to reviving and expanding the US-Israeli alliance, which he calls a strategic bedrock for the US.
And under no circumstances will Iran be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon.
He has said he would support a two-state solution, but only if Israel wants it. Each presidential hopeful has come out with strong rhetoric on Israeli relations, but for lobbyists and voters, It remains to be seen whether these campaign convictions will turn into real policy. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss how the U.S. presidential candidates could shape the future of U.S.-Israel relations in Washington, D.C. is journalist and author Max Blumenthal. His books have explored issues within the U.S. Republican Party, Israel's military policies and the occupation of Palestinian lands. And in Columbus, Ohio is Professor Eytan Gilboa. He's written extensively about U.S.-Israel relations and was a consultant to Israeli Prime Minister and Ministries of Defense and Foreign Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, Eytan Gilboa. Do you believe that the U.S. and Israel have drifted apart under the Obama administration?
Yes. I think that American-Israeli relations during most of the Obama years at the White House have been marred by serious disagreements about several issues. The most important one has been the nuclear deal with Iran and Israeli-Palestinian relations. The expectation in Israel is that he might still take some actions about the Israeli-Palestinian issue until he departs from the White House on January 20, 2017. Policymakers and politicians are concerned about his policies, especially vis-a-vis a potential resolution at the United Nations Security Council calling for Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank and the establishment of a Palestinian state within 2 years. Usually, such a resolution would automatically trigger an American veto. Israel is not confident that this is going to happen, and such a resolution would only reduce the chances for a peace process rather than increase them.
Okay, Max Blumenthal, from what we heard from Eytan Gilboa, it sounds as if the Israelis feel abandoned by President Obama. Does that check out for you?
Yeah, it's kind of laughable. It's kind of surreal to hear a tone of abandonment when Barack Obama is pledging to increase Israel's annual aid to $4 billion in weapons that it can use to kill more Palestinian civilians. And that's where Obama's really left his mark. He's left his mark by giving Israel the latitude and the weapons to kill hundreds of children, to leave thousands more traumatized, to destroy 100,000 homes in the Gaza Strip in 2014. Former Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman marveled that the U.S. gave Israel 51 days to, in his words, operate in the Gaza Strip, where it's left much of the area in ruins. Settlements have expanded. The Green Line is completely evaporated. The two-state solution has been unveiled as a complete fantasy. And I think I think it's laughable to say that any demand that Israel leave the occupied Palestinian West Bank harms chances for peace. Unfortunately, the resolution that Eytan mentioned at the UN that Obama plans to either introduce or not veto, would alter UN Resolution 242, which demands that Israel leave the West Bank and possibly allow Israel to keep the major settlement blocks it's built to separate East Jerusalem from the West Bank.
Okay, Eytan, I want to move on to AIPAC for a second and the conference that was held very recently. We heard the candidates' speeches, on the right and the left. We heard strong support for Israel from the candidates who spoke. Was that pandering or principled?
Well, first of all, one has to be very careful about statements and commitments made during elections, because candidates cannot and would not implement 98% of them. So whatever people say, candidates say during elections are not that serious. On the other hand, we have heard only support for Israel and for Israeli positions, and from both sides. Hillary Clinton mentioned the hope for resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Contrary to what Mr. Blumenthal said, Israel is the only factor to be responsible for the lack of peace process. Obama is also responsible. I would say that during the Obama years, we have had the least negotiations the less negotiations between Israeli and the Palestinians. And the reason for that is very simple. The Palestinians believed that they don't have to make any concessions, that the United States will deliver Israel. And of course, this cannot happen. And the rest of the statements about violence goes both ways. In the last few months, what we have seen is Palestinian terrorists using knives to attack citizens in the streets of Jerusalem. And we are not hearing enough condemnation about that kind of terrorism that obviously is not helpful to move the peace process forward.
Eytan, I wonder how might American Jews of the GOP persuasion reconcile a Trump candidacy or a Trump presidency even, given that he courts and almost refuses to disavow neo-Nazis, some of the people who hate Jews the most on earth. How do they reconcile that?
Well, I think Israelis are concerned about many of the statements made by Donald Trump. I think that not too many would like to see him to serve at the White House. He made many statements in support of Israel, but he has no experience. Even what he says on a certain day, he may negate on the other day. I think after 8 years of failed president who had no experience in foreign policy, the United States now needs someone who can restore American leadership in the world, especially in the Middle East, because there's nobody else to help establish peaceful moves in the region and stability.
Okay, Max Blumenthal, Bernie Sanders chose not to go to AIPAC. Was that the right thing for him to do?
Well, I thought it was unusual to see, and it's always unusual to see major presidential candidates cozying up to a foreign apartheid lobby. I went back and watched the presidential debates in 1988 from the Democratic Party, and you saw Al Gore and figures like this actually denouncing apartheid in South Africa, but now they're cozying up to it. You have Hillary Clinton taking millions of dollars from pro-Israel oligarch Haim Saban, who said that he's a one-issue guy and his issue is Israel. He doesn't care about the United States, and this is who's guiding Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. At AIPAC, you heard her attack not only Palestinians in an extremely Islamophobic fashion, but also attack the campus left in the United States, which is engaged in Palestine solidarity actions, and that was part of her pledge that she made public to pro-Israel oligarch Haim Saban. So she's listening to these 1% figures, and Bernie Sanders was out campaigning on the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona, campaigning at Native American Indian reservations in Arizona, and campaigning in Utah. And I thought that he was running a much more American grassroots campaign than Hillary Clinton. And it actually is just deeply disturbing that foreign apartheid lobbyists are guiding American foreign policy in the Middle East and leading to so much destabilization in the region.
Max, you mentioned Haim Saban. At the Saban Forum in 2015, there was a panel actually entitled, Israelis are from Mars, American Jews are from Venus. Why? Why are American Jews and Israeli Jews drifting apart, Max?
Well, the pro-Israel lobby in Israel itself is hostile to American Jews and hostile to the Jewish diaspora. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu, after attacks on Jewish targets in Paris, told French Jews to leave their native country. It's why AIPAC, the leading arm of the pro-Israel lobby, hosted just a few days ago Bishop Edwin Harper from West Virginia, a pastor who has said that the Antichrist will be a Jew. They hosted him because he cares about Israel. Now we have to understand, the American Jews vote on the economy. They don't vote on Israel. Very few American Jews vote on Israel. And those who do vote on Israel are a tiny slice that supports the pro-Israel lobby, which is increasingly right-wing and has embedded itself in a Republican Party that really reflects the views of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's why we see so much tension between Netanyahu and Obama, even as Obama basically gives Netanyahu the store.
Eytan, Gilboa, does Prime Minister Netanyahu care if he's losing support from American Jews?
Yes, of course, because the support of America depends to a large extent on the support of American Jews. I disagree with the assumption that relations between Israel and American Jews somewhat drifting away. From my trips and conversations with many American leaders, American Jewish leaders, they are concerned about what's going on in Israel. They are concerned about Israeli policies, but the basic affiliation, identification, and sympathy, unlike the person who is participating with me in the program, the sympathy is basically towards the people of Israel. I think one has to distinguish between government policy and the state and what the state stands for. This garbage talk about Israel being an apartheid state without any evidence to support that. People in South Africa are ashamed to hear that people in America, like Mr. Blumenthal, compares the Israeli policies and call them apartheid and compare them with the apartheid in South Africa. This is clearly not the case. I think there is a lot to improve in American-Israeli relations. I think Israeli prime ministers have to be more considerate of opinions of American Jews, but the kind of talk we are hearing from Michael Blumenthal is not helping. Okay. He is provocative, he is not telling the truth, and he is distorting the true facts on the ground.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I'm going to give Max the final word here because the last comment was almost ad hominem if it wasn't. So Max, 20 seconds, please. Final comment.
Well, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Daniel Shapiro, has said that Israel has two sets of laws in the West Bank, one for Israeli Jews like Eytan and one for Palestinians, that Israeli Jews have superior rights. He's not exactly a virulent anti-Zionist. And me and Eytan, white guys who originate from Europe, have more rights than any indigenous Palestinian in the world on the ground in Israel, Palestine, a settler colony, which is controlled by a system of apartheid that is disgusting to progressive Jews like myself. And I think that's a problem that Israel and its most right-wing government in history are going to have to grapple with over time.
Okay, Max and Eytan, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, time is our enemy. We are out of time.
Say, John,
okay,
one word.
Okay, 10 seconds, please.
Just one word.
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
Well, the United States has one system for whites and one system for blacks, and white policemen shoot.
And you're
black,
defending that. A foreign apartheid lobbyist is defending apartheid in the U.S.
Nobody accused the United States of being
We're
apartheid.
hearing from a foreign apartheid lobbyist. We don't need to hear a foreign apartheid lobbyist tell us how to live in the U.S.
Okay.
And if I
let this continue, I don't know how far down the rabbit hole we're going to go here. Mr. Gilboa, we are out of time.
We don't have to hear double standards and hypocrisy.
Okay, your point was understood. Max and Eytan, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. We are out of time. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the Newsmakers, the battle for Karabakh. We look at what led to the worst fighting in decades. And in Picture This, building an ivory pyre, how Kenya plans to take on the poachers. It's been called the frozen conflict, a 22-year battle over Karabakh, a piece of land belonging to Azerbaijan but occupied by Armenia since a war between the countries ended in 1994. There have been sporadic clashes in the years since then, but nothing resembling the events of the past few days. Soraya Lenny reports.
It's known as the frozen conflict. But there's never really been a freeze in fighting. It's a standoff that in recent days has exploded, and despite another ceasefire, could push Azerbaijan and Armenia to the brink of war again.
If an Armenian soldier does not want to die, then let them get off Azerbaijani territory.
This is the most wide-scale fighting which Azerbaijan has attempted since the ceasefire in 1994.
But this is a conflict that has been simmering for decades.
Sniper duels and similar situations still occur there.
No ceasefire, no negotiations, no proposals have managed to put an end to the deadlock, and certainly not to the violence. The occupied Karabakh is mostly ethnically Armenian. It existed as an autonomous region within the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. But as the Soviet Union unraveled in the late 1980s, so too did relations between the two ethnic groups. And in 1991, Azerbaijan brought Karabakh under direct control. Its Armenian residents revolted. They declared independence in a referendum, internationally recognized as illegal. The war killed between 20 to 30,000 people and displaced about 1 million, both Azeris and Armenians. By 1994, both sides agreed to a hard-earned but shaky truce.
I think the longer we have this peace, the quicker both the Armenian and Azeri peoples will find points of agreement and shake hands.
They never did shake hands. Instead, the status of the region was never officially defined, and no peace deal was ever signed. In recent weeks, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, showed growing impatience over the situation. He and his government are not interested in how things stand and want Karabakh returned to Azerbaijan. The OSCE Minsk group includes Russia, France, the US, and is in charge of negotiating a settlement, but have so far failed to end the standoff. Just before the latest fighting broke out, the presidents of both countries found themselves at the same nuclear summit in the US, but in a sign of tensions, refused to meet. As more blood is spilled, it could provide the impetus needed for world powers to force them into the same room, to finally end one of the region's most protracted conflicts. Soraya Lenny, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the conflict in occupied Karabakh is Laurence Broers in London. He's an associate fellow at Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia program. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Broers. Do you think the ceasefire is going to hold?
Good afternoon. Well, I think the ceasefire perhaps reflects that there is a military stalemate on the ground at the moment. There's no real offensive battle plan on the Armenian side. And I think perhaps if the aim was to create a new political situation for the reformulation of the peace process, I think Baku can perhaps consider that objective has been met. So I don't see a military logic to continued escalation, but there's no reason to be complacent or optimistic. I think there's no deterrent for another such episode to happen in the near future.
Has this frozen conflict been ignored by the international community?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily been ignored as such. There have been intensive efforts through the Minsk group. The US, Russia, and France have been actively engaged. 5 different peace proposals have been put forward. But I think what has really been neglected is the ceasefire. You have a really very limited mandate of the OSCE, just 6 unarmed observers who have to announce in advance their inspections of the front line. And I think there is an increasing discrepancy between that very small mandate and the scale of hostilities that we've been seeing, not just over the last 3 days, but over the last 2 to 3 years.
Is there any one party who holds the key to peace?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is there any one party who might hold the key to peace?
I would really emphasize that it is the parties themselves that hold the key to peace. But if there's one external actor that really has the potential to be decisive, it's of course Russia. Russia is Armenia's closest strategic ally, but it's also been following a policy of symmetrical armament. It's the chief arms seller to Azerbaijan. It's what's enabled Azerbaijan to rearm itself. And there's also been a lot of rumors about whether Russia wants to put boots on the ground in the form of peacekeepers. And I think this crisis has rather caught Russia off balance. And I think it's a test now, not only of Russia's capacity to influence the situation, but of international cooperation through the auspices of the Minsk group to really allow diplomacy to take back the initiative.
Laurence, thanks so much for helping us demystify some of that. Laurence Broers joining us there from London. In today's Picture This, Africa's elephants and rhinos are at risk of extinction, with thousands being poached for their tusks and horns every year. But now the Kenyan government is sending out a strong message to poachers. Let's take a look. Today's Newsmaker has been the next American president, as we ask what the future holds for U.S. relations with Israel. Under Obama's watch, relations with Israel have arguably cooled. But will this remain the case when his successor is elected? Even policymakers and politicians, including the Israeli Prime Minister, seem uncertain of what, if anything, Obama plans to do before he leaves office. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.